Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome back to another history presentation. No, it will not be me today, this time. Thank you for listening for like an hour and a half this afternoon. Hopefully not too many of you fell asleep. I think one thing I forgot to mention in my essay, I should have given some credit to Pastor Justin Dauk. Is Pastor Dauk here somewhere, I hope? But he provided me with a lot of information, particularly about the Neatman story, the pig thief. And actually, he comes from that family line as well. So right now, I'm here to introduce Professor Paul Koelpin, and I'm doing this on behalf of the WELS Historical Institute. I'm the chairman of the board for the Historical Institute. We've been having a series of lectures, our Great Heritage series. It started a few years ago when Pastor Paul Prange gave a presentation on the history of Michigan Lutheran Seminary. Professor Brenner gave a presentation on the history of Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. And now we are ready for Professor Paul Koelpin to give a presentation on the history of ministerial education here in New Ulm. One lay delegate I was sitting next to at the worship service last night, he said, I'm looking forward to hearing about how we ended up with a college here. And I said, well, you're at the right place. You're going to hear about that. Professor Koelpin was a 1990 graduate, actually grew up on this campus. His father, I mentioned him just briefly on today, was Professor Arnold Koelpin. Professor Koelpin graduated from the seminary in 1990 and was assigned to be a tutor at Northwestern College. He was actually there my senior year, was his first year as a tutor on the campus, so that ages him or ages me, or I'm not sure which. After 2 years at Northwestern, he served in Columbia, Maryland for about 3 years, and then accepted the call to come here to Martin Luther College to teach history and religion. And he's been here since 1995, correct? So I give you Professor Paul Koelpin.
It's my pleasure to be with you and to give you some insight into a campus that I have seen from a kid's eye perspective, because I was born in New Ulm and raised in New Ulm. My father being a professor here, so in the 1960s and 70s, this was my home. This is a place I knew very, very well. And then I went away because I wanted to be a pastor. I went away to Watertown, Wisconsin, and I learned at Northwestern College, and then to the seminary in Mequon. And so Wisconsin's been a part of my life for a long time. Both my parents actually are from Wisconsin, and whenever we went to Grandma and Grandpa's house, we went to Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. So I have deep roots in Wisconsin, but I also have deep roots here because I've been back here now since 1995 when the so-called amalgamation happened. And I've served here now for 30 years. I want to say that I loved growing up in New Ulm as a kid. It was an idyllic setting to ride your bikes around a campus and just be part of a campus community and be part of the events and go to basketball games and football games and everything. It was just part of my life. But I never figured I'd live here again. I just thought I was going to go to become a pastor and I would get called who knows where. And I did. I got called to Columbia, Maryland, and started a congregation on the East Coast. But since 1995, I've been back where I grew up. And so I know this campus from a kid's eye view, and I know it from, I suppose, a professor's eye view. To some extent, that makes me objective and subjective all at the same time. And but I love this campus, and its story is a fascinating one. I have an outline that I was very late in the game producing because I thought I'm just going to do a presentation, and I've got slides and pictures of the campus and the campus footprint, and aerial photos of 1930 are absolutely fascinating to me. But I figured I'll give you something of an outline so that if I say something, and I may not say everything that's on here because I'm not going to be slavish to what I have here. I guess I'll be slavish to the fact that my slides are in some kind of an order. Anytime I teach history, I know this about teaching history, that I follow some kind of chronology, but I'm also sometimes in a theme, and I just want to follow that through for a little bit. So I can't be purely chronological in everything I do. I will be somewhat chronological. I'm going to start at the beginning and how in the world it ever got here in the first place, but I can't stay in chronology all the time. I'm labeling this the New Ulm campus and its role in WELS history, because if I said Dr. Martin Luther College or DMLC, that would date it to a certain time. If I say MLC, that dates it to what we have now. If I said DMLHS, that would also mean the preparatory school that was on this campus, or MLA. I was a student at MLA for 2 years before they decided to move everything to Prairie du Chien. I graduated from Prairie du Chien in 1981. I was on the floor of the convention when they made the decision in 1978 to close the school. I remember standing there thinking, wow, that just changed my life. I went home and I said to my mom, I'm going to Wisconsin for school next year. Huh. They just decided that for me. So the story of the New Ulm campus, which included preparatory education and college education over time and its role in WELS history. Here's a timeline. Some of this Joel Otto gave you in his presentation this afternoon, but I think the dates are useful, so if you can keep these dates in your mind. Obviously, the 1850 founding of the Wisconsin Synod makes it easy. It's just the easiest synod ever. For when are we going to have our 200th? Well, guess what? It's going to be in 2050 if God allows the world to last that long. The founding of the Minnesota and the Michigan Synods is 1860, so a decade after. It sort of follows the statehood pattern. Wisconsin became a state in 1848, Minnesota became a state in 1858, and so everything's a decade later. I mean, when they're doing cool stuff in Wisconsin, I figure 10 years later it'll get here some. 1872 is the Synodical Conference. He mentions the Synodical Conference because Professor Otto did, because that's in some ways the golden age of Lutheran confessional work, as the Missouri Synod, the Wisconsin Synod, and the other synods that are joined together, Minnesota, Michigan, and so forth, they joined together in a federated type of conference. There was fellowship involved among and between them. It's why synods start. Synods start to do what individual congregations can't do on their own, and they seek each other out to say, we not only need mutual encouragement as confessional Lutheran churches, but we need to be able to provide for the next generation worker training, and we need to be able to aggregate our resources to do things like mission outreach. More difficult to do on your own, and synods find ways to pull themselves together, and there are all kinds of synodical formations. This one, the Synodical Conference of 1872, is a significant one, because you'll notice this next date is 1884, is when DMLC, or the building called Old Main, was built and dedicated in 1884. But the Minnesota Synod's been around for a while. And so what are they doing in this time between 20-year span, so to speak? Well, they recognize that there's a necessity to do mission work, and they recognize there's a necessity to have worker training. The thing is, they've got agreements. They've got an agreement with the Wisconsin Synod that will pay part of a salary of a professor at Watertown if you'll let the Minnesota Synod have students there. However, they weren't able to make good on that allocation, the obligation that they said they made, because in the 1870s there were some natural disasters and things that happened among churches in the Minnesota Synod, and so that relationship doesn't start out, get strong right away. The other thing you want to keep in mind when it comes to dates is anniversaries of things. Okay, so we all know 2017. Well, you know what happened in 2017? The 500th anniversary of the Reformation, because that was 1517. He nails things on a church door. So 2017, we're in the 500th of everything now. The 500th of Luther's everything until 2046. Then he died, and then but we're going to be there for a while. And the next big blowout is 2030, because 1530 is the Augsburg Confession that made us Lutherans, the cornerstone confession of Lutheranism. So in 2030, we're going to have a big celebration of, we're all on June 25th. Every family is going to take out the Augsburg Confession and read it. You have to. You can't be a WELS member without reading the Augsburg Confession. But put it on your calendar now, so that you have everything ready. But here's the deal. In 1883, they were talking about the possibility of making a college in Minnesota. Part of the reason why was because it was too much for Minnesotan families to think about sending young boys to Watertown, Wisconsin. I'm talking prep school. To be honest with you, the main impetus is probably prep school or high school education to begin with. It's not that they didn't have college education in the mix or pre-ministerial education and eventually go on to the seminary, but if you're going to send a 13-year-old boy to Watertown, that's a long ways away, and we don't have 4-lane highways. And you got a flat tire every time you went 2 hours out of whatever place you went. So this is it's the younger boys. What are you going to do with prep school age boys? Is part of the impetus. The other thing is Luther was born in 1483. And guess what C.J. Albrecht said? It's the 400th anniversary of Luther's birth. We should do something. And everyone else went, wow, CJ, what a great idea. Let's have a college. And that's it in a nutshell. Thank you very much. And 1892 is the Federation of the Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin Synods. Wisconsin Synod is by far the biggest of the synods. The most people, the most churches, the most pastors. Michigan's smallish, getting going, but not the same as Wisconsin. Minnesota's sort of the same. But the interesting thing is that the leadership of Minnesota and the leadership of Michigan knew each other because they had come from a mission house in Switzerland called St. Krishona outside of Basel. Professor Otto talked about the Hermannsburg Mission Society, the Barmen, and so forth. Those were German mission societies that sent people over to Wisconsin. But Michigan and Minnesota were influenced significantly by the Basel St. Krishona mission houses and mission societies. C.J. Albrecht went to St. Krishona. Pastor Lederer in Michigan, they were classmates in Switzerland. They knew each other. Let's connect with Wisconsin Synod. Merger of the synods doesn't happen until 1918, but of course, what do you think 1917 was? The 400th anniversary of the Reformation. Believe me, everything happens on anniversaries. They do. 1917 was when a lot of Lutheran mergers happened. And it happened, why? Because, well, it's the 400th anniversary of the Reformation. We should do something. And so they did something. I know I'm skipping a lot of space in here, but just make sure that you understand the space that I skipped doesn't have synodical things in it necessarily. What it has in there is something like post-war, post-World War I, after 1918, 1919 is the end of World War I, okay? And then it has 1920 Great Depression, 1930s Great Depression, 1939 starts World War II, American entry comes in a little bit later in the 40s, but you've got another World War. That affects things in there. And once World War II gets done, everybody decided to have a baby. And so the 1950s is a baby boom. Professor Otto said every single church in the WELS added a classroom and built a new church. And the need for pastors and teachers was enormous in the 50s into the 60s. Keep that in mind. 61 split with the LCMS, also significant, because now the Wisconsin Synod is off on its own. And it doesn't have the synodical conference, and some of the situations that were part of the understanding between the Missouri Synod and the Wisconsin Synod, that affects things. Then, 1979. This is real history for me because I lived this history. DMLC is the sole occupant of this campus because I'm a sophomore in high school and I get shipped off to Prairie, Wisconsin. Martin Luther Preparatory School shifted the whole high school part of this campus off to southwestern Wisconsin. 1995 is the amalgamation. I actually was the last person ever called by the Board of Control of Northwestern College. I was at Northwestern College in its last year. I came with the amalgamation, and it was told me point blank, if you accept the call to Northwestern, you are accepting a call to the amalgamated college in New Ulm. I knew I would be going back to where I grew up. But I was in Watertown that last year. And I added one so I could put something in the 21st century, and that is the beautiful building that we used for worship last night. The Chapel of the Christ was built in 2009. Prior to that, we had chapel in here. I would have stood up here and I would have said, our reading is from John chapter 1, and then you'd say, are you kidding me? But this is where we would have been. In older synod conventions, when they were in New Ulm, the opening service was always at St. Paul's Church. And you had the opening service there, and then you'd come to the gym, and you didn't have air conditioning, and you just sweat the whole time. All right, here's the elephant in the room, right? Why New Ulm? Because that's what everyone wants to know, and they still want to know. So this is endless curiosity and debate. Why in the world is the sort of the last college campus standing in New Ulm? And we're the Wisconsin Synod, aren't we? It isn't New Ulm, Wisconsin. And how in the world does it end up in Minnesota, and why are we here? And this is the question. So, these are some official times when it came up. This doesn't mean the unofficial times when everyone's sitting there in the back and going, what are we doing? But here, in 1884, they wondered, what are we going to build? Why are we building Old Main in New Ulm? Why are we building a building in New Ulm? There were two places that were vying for the Minnesota Synod, Shakopee, which is now a suburb on the southern side of the Twin Cities. Well, maybe we should build it in Shakopee, but Shakopee never got its act together. And the only place that actually sort of had a plan of action, was New Ulm. 10 years later, this is right after the Federated Synods. 1892, and now you got 1893, 94. The guy who was the first president of this institution becomes the president of MLS in Saginaw. And they concoct an idea to close down this campus and move all teacher training to Saginaw. Didn't happen. 1908, 9, 10. Well, why is this the issue? Well, because Old Main was the only building on this campus for over 25 years. And they had gotten to a point where Old Main was too small. It couldn't be a residence and a cafeteria and a classroom building and a chapel and everything else all at the same time. You can't do that. A music hall, it was everything. Absolutely everything you did in a college campus was in that building. Okay, well, I think what we should do is build a dormitory and maybe a chapel, auditorium, music place. Oh, well, wait a second. If you're going to start talking about building, putting some more spades in the ground, we better stop and time out. Are you sure New Ulm's the place we should be? St. James and Hutchinson both said, well, maybe you should build there. They didn't. Then, right at the time of the merger, the official merger, when we become the Wisconsin Synod as we know it today, you've got this talk that, honestly, maybe we just shut down the Minnesota thing and we just move everything to Watertown. Teacher training, pastor training, all college training, but they had a prep school still on that campus too, so you have to be honest about can that campus manage a whole new influx of students? Would that be a wise thing to do? Again, they decide not to. The 60s are probably the most critical time, the 1962 Special Convention on Worker Training. I'll get to that toward the end of this, but the decision was made to invest money on the footprint in this campus in the 1960s. And I say that, remember, the baby boom generation is starting to be in grade schools and so forth, the post-World War II generation, once you get to the early 60s. And this special convention on worker training is significant because if we need, they estimated 100 teachers a year. And DMLC at that point in the 50s was producing about 30 per year. And we need 100. And they said, well, we need more space. We need more facilities. We don't have enough. We can't have 500 college students on this campus. It's not going to work. This is the same time that the Synod is deciding, well, they came up with this idea in Fond du Lac. Maybe we should have this, the Fond du Lac program where you go to summer schools in New Ulm, but you spend time on the Winnebago Academy, Lutheran Academy campus in Fond du Lac. It was the Fond du Lac plan. And it was kind of an end run to get teachers into the system as quickly as we could. So you did a couple summer schools, and in between that, you were educated in Fond du Lac. They put a few teachers there it was the Winnebago program. It suffered from lack of people knowing what in the world was going on and why they were doing it or who was in control of it or in charge of it. So it closed down in the early 60s. So by 61, the Winnebago thing didn't work. At the same time, late 50s, really early 60s, they decided to put a junior college, and he mentioned this in his Synod history, junior college in Milwaukee, Milwaukee Lutheran Teachers College. Sometimes it's called Wisconsin Lutheran College, but it's the initial first iteration of Wisconsin Lutheran College. That's existing in 62. That exists in 62. The Synod actually added on to Wisco's footprint so that MLTC could have room there. By 1969, the Synod in Convention has to make a decision. We can't manage 2 colleges like this. What are we going to do? Are we going to, actually 3 colleges, because Northwestern College was just pastor training, but nobody ever worried about that. What they were worried about is we need 100+ teachers, and everybody's adding grade schools, and our kids need to go somewhere. Teachers was the thing. So they put Milwaukee or New Ulm, and they in the end, they decide the vote was about 2/3, 1/3, secret ballot, about 2/3, 1/3 to close down Milwaukee Lutheran Teachers College, WLC, and move everything to New Ulm, and double down on teacher education in New Ulm. And then lastly, the 1990s. When we get to a fiscal, tight spot, what are you going to do? New Ulm campus? You're going to go to Wisconsin? Are we going to move everything to Northwestern? Northwestern on Watertown's campus going to move to New Ulm? Do we build a new one? Do we build a new one in Appleton? Do we build a new one in Milwaukee? Build a new one in La Crosse? Somewhere in Wisconsin. All those things were out there. All right, this is the guy right here, C.J. Albrecht. He is the president of the Minnesota Synod. It's a separate independent synod. In 1860, he becomes the president in 1883, and he starts cheering for Martin Luther's birth. And he gets a bunch of people at St. Paul's in New Ulm to be interested in the possibility of maybe, as a project, we should build a campus for preparatory training in New Ulm here. And there were some significant people involved in that. Now, they did have a Minnesota Synod building committee. And they had 3 guys from the Twin Cities and 3 guys from New Ulm on that committee. And the swing vote guy was from Stillwater. That wasn't considered the Twin Cities yet. But the swing vote guy was C.J. Albrecht's brother-in-law. So, I mean, and that's the part of Synod history that you gotta know. You gotta know who's married to whom. He talks about Seeker, who was the president of the Minnesota Synod. Eventually, Seeker goes out to be the pastor of the first, earliest, oldest German Lutheran church in the whole United States in Manhattan, New York. But the only reason that Seeker, the Minnesota Synod district president, or Synod president, and the Wisconsin Synod president actually got along and knew each other is because they were in-laws. And you got to know those things. And that's why you read J.P. Kaler's history, because he tells you who's all related to everybody. He's the pastor at St. Paul's until 1924. Here it is, Dr. Martin Luther College, 1884. I will say this, it is true. It is absolutely true that they started excavating and putting footings in before they got the actual okay of the Minnesota Synod that once and for all we're going to put it in New Ulm. C.J. Albrecht kind of lived by the, let's just do it and see what they think. And so they had foundations and footings, and he said, look at that. It's at a real cool place up on a hill. You can overlook the rest of the valley. And the guys on the building committee went, oh, okay, I guess. And up goes Martin Luther College. It's a cool picture, I think. It's an interesting building. It was purposely supposed to be designed after buildings that the builder and architect, who was from New Ulm, had seen in St. Louis. And he said, Concordia St. Louis has a building that looks kind of like this, and I think that looks neat with a tower and these windows like this and big entryway. This is what Old Main looked like in some older photos. Now, some of these collage photos cut across time. So they're not all from 1800 or 1900 or something like that. But, for instance, this is a bedroom in Old Main. That's a classroom in Old Main that actually had an organ in it. So this is probably before they had any kind of music hall at all, because it was the music hall as well. It was a cafeteria. It's actually an older photo that comes from probably the 1930s or 40s. And it was a piano studio at one point. I mean, all those uses for Old Main in its variety of uses in its older days. I like this picture too because of a couple of things. I mean, it's the kids trying to be cool because they're in Phi Ed. But behind Old Main, they have the first gym. This is the first gym. It was called the Turnhalle. And they had a bars in there, and they had a basketball hoop in there so they could actually shoot hoops. It wasn't heated or anything. It was just a wooden building. But this is 1909, and there are 44 boys in there, and I would say 2/3 of them look like they're in high school. And keep that in mind, because that's one of the themes of how this unfolds. This was perceived as a place where you did preparatory education, and sure, it could lead to becoming perhaps a teacher, but in its initial design, this is what the role that DMLC at that time played. All right, curriculum and programs quickly. 1884, it initially had a 3-year preparatory program and a 4-year academic program. And I mean academic program, nobody quite knew what that meant, except you didn't have to take the highest level of Greek or anything like that in the preparatory stages. It was more designed for a general education that could lead you to something greater if that would happen. I want you to understand college is code for higher education. It's post-grade school. It's college. It's higher education. Some of it followed a Germanic gymnasium kind of format. I mean, this is why even at, I think at LPS today, they still have Sexta, Quinta, Quarta, and all that kind of thing, and they had that here too. And so you ended high school in the 3rd year. Well, because you had 2 college years after that. And your 6-year program that was your full gymnasium program. 1885, they ended up adding a theological department because they added a theological department because they had some German immigrants that had training already in Germany. And so then they thought, well, these guys are advanced already. So let's do full Greek and let's get them ready to go on to seminary training. 1887 is the normal program. A normal school is a teacher education school. So normal training meant that you were instructing in the norms and standards that are part of a model education. So you have norms by which you are educating people who will go into classrooms and teach others. And that's why it's called a normal school. But anytime you see normal, that means teacher education. That wasn't added really until 1887. 1893 is a significant adjustment because, of course, now you have the federated synods. And they all decide together, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put normal training for Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. We're going to put normal school training in Minnesota. We're going to put pastor training in Watertown. The seminary is going to be in Wauwatosa, and prep school at MLS. You're going to still have the prep school here, and you're going to still have the prep school in Northwestern. Both these college campuses are going to have prep schools, and they're going to have prep schools for a long time. They retained an academic program because academic program actually brought students in. 1903, they added a 4th preparatory year, so a 4th year of high school. 1928, a 3rd normal year. That was normal until 1954. That is the first 4-year college Bachelor of Science and Education degrees are 1954. First time that's happened. 1916 catalog says the teacher's seminary, that's what they called it. Dr. Martin Luther College in New Ulm was organized in 1893 under the resolution of this federated synod. They also had this line after it, or paragraph, at the same time, the courses of our lower classes are so arranged to afford preparatory training. So there's a prep school on campus. I'm going to get to some enrollment things later, but keep this in mind. High school enrollment numbers, always surpass the college enrollment numbers until you get to the 1960s. Once you're in the 1960s, the college numbers start to increase and the prep numbers are lower. But all the way through the late 1800s and early 1900s, the college numbers are lower than the prep numbers. I suspect the same is true, or was true, at Northwestern as well. High school education was mandatory. You had to go to high school. You didn't have to go to college. So, DMLC president. C.J. Albrecht was only president because he had to be to begin with. He didn't necessarily want to be. He was on the building committee. He was the president of the synod, and well, okay, fine. If I have to be the president de facto, I guess. Otto Hoyer is the second president. He's the guy that eventually goes to MLS and becomes the president of MLS. And then he gets called to Northwestern, and then he becomes the dean or the inspector at Northwestern. So he's an interesting character, Hoyer is. He kind of moves around from place to place to place. John Schaller is the president and the in-between centuries. He becomes the president after the Federated Synod happens, all the way up into 1908 when he was called to the seminary, and he became the president of the seminary. This guy here, Ackerman, is an interesting character, and I put a red box around him because Ackerman was president until, 1918, because in 1917, he spoke out against the draft of World War I in public. He went down to Turner Hall, and there were the mayor of town and the city attorney, and you know what? Ackerman got up. And he didn't do it just once. He also made speech at another place. He told everyone he didn't have anything prepared, and then he stood up and spoke longer than anybody. But Ackerman speaks out against the draft of World War I, and Minnesota had the Committee of Public Safety. The Committee of Public Safety said, well, if you let this guy continue to be the president of your institution, we're going to shut down the college. And it got taken to the highest levels of the Wisconsin Synod, because now you have an actual federated joint synod, really. You're all amalgamated together, and the president of the Wisconsin Synod says to Ackerman, I think you need to step down. So he does. He has an interesting backstory. He resigns from being the president. He gets called to Brighton Township outside of New Ulm by Cortland, and he becomes a pastor there, and then he gets called to Emmanuel and Mankato, and then he becomes the president of the Minnesota district of the Wisconsin Synod. I'm a president again. So Ackerman had an interesting end run. During Ackerman's time, they built what we call Summit Hall. It's a boys' dormitory. It was just this part of it, but they put a gym. They had the turn hall that we can tear that down because we put a gym in the basement on one side here. And it's still down there, and now it's the Summit Training Hall, and they got all kinds of weights and things in there. But that was their gym. And it looks pretty much like that still today. At the same time, 1911, 1912, they build the aula, or the music hall, we call it, the chapel music hall. This is what it looked like on the inside. That's Fritz Reuter, who was the famous music professor who was called to DMLC. And there he is on the stage of the, not this one here, but the stage of the music hall where that back classroom is. Those of you who know the campus, that was the back music classroom. Even in old MLA days, we'd go back into the back music classroom. That's where Reuter is. He's on that stage with the male chorus. 4 years after this picture, he composed arguably his most famous tune, and that is the tune to God's Word is Our Great Heritage, which became the WELS National Anthem. And so he composed the WELS National Anthem. I like that tune, and it's called Reuter. We, by the way, have the Reuter piano in the chapel. And it was refurbished, and it arguably might have been the piano on which he composed that tune. This is what the aula looked like. Now it's just piano practice rooms and a classroom on the end. It doesn't look at all like that, but it was their stage, their chapel. They put an organ in here. They put this organ in, and no more than, a little more, I'll say, than 15 years later, they actually decide that that's not going to be the chapel anymore. They built this building. And the stage I'm standing on now was the stage. And they took that organ and behind this screen, that's where they put it. And that organ stood there until 1968. And then that's where the organ from the old music hall was. Just going to go through these presidents quickly. This is just a sort of like snapshot. J.P. Meyer had been a professor on this campus for over 15 years, and then he took a call to Wisconsin. He was in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, when Ackerman is forced to resign, and they say, well, we need somebody to stabilize things in New Ulm. Would you become the president and stabilize things in New Ulm? So J.P. Meyer, who, by the way, also is going to take a call in 1920 to Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary and become the president of the seminary, and served there for an enormously long time until he was 91 years old. These men right here arguably are the people who see the footprint of the campus change over time. Bliefernicht is an interesting character. I won't say that much about him except for the fact that he was born and raised in Watertown, Wisconsin. And he went to Northwestern, and he went to the seminary, and he was assigned to Darfur, Minnesota, which is just north of St. James, about 30 miles from here. When Schaller took a call to Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary, they said, we need a pastor-trained guy who's got some capability. And they said, Bliefernicht's the guy. So he comes onto the campus as a professor and eventually becomes the president. He will be the president through the Depression years, which caused him great depression. And he has a heart attack and is not able to continue to be the president. He still teaches until the 1940s, but he is not the president. Schweppe is the longest serving president on this campus's history from 1935 to 1966. So he sees things through after Bliefernicht has to resign, and he is president all the way until those critical years of the early 1960s. And then, in some ways, the Conrad Frey, who is president here from 66 to 1980, he sees a significant amount of adjustment and change on this campus. I'm going to go through this real quickly now, but what he sees is a significant building boom. This auditorium was put in 1967-68. These lower chairs, these lower slanted part right here, was always lower and slanted, and this was the auditorium. And the gym started right in that, where in between area. That was where one basketball hoop was, and where that back wall is, that's where the other basketball hoop was. And it was a flat floor that went straight flat that way. It's during Frey's time that they make this tiered cement thing, and they make this into an auditorium. 1967, 1968, significant amount of change on this campus. DMLC as such, and I say this for people who have no sense of what a synodical school, it did not operate as an autonomous church-related institution. It didn't have its own, it didn't have its own will, so to speak, that it could just decide what it wanted to do. It remained subsidized by the Synod on property that was owned by the Synod, with instructors called by synodically elected governing board. So it is a Synod school, always was a Synod school, still is a Synod school. This campus is owned by the Wisconsin Synod. It isn't MLC's to do with whatever it pleases. This campus and how we function, we are responsive to whatever the Synod wants or needs. The college department trains exclusively for the teaching ministry. That was from the 75th anniversary catalog. And by the way, it did that for 102 years up until 1995, when pastor training was introduced onto this campus. But prior to that, for over a century, all it did in the college level was train teachers. Yeah, early 1900s, they had baseball and they had football and they even had a tennis club. I don't know what the C's and the B's and all that kind of stuff is, but and they had a basketball team. And who did they play? Well, they played the people from town sometimes. Sometimes they played area places and so forth. But you didn't have the kind of conferences that we have now in the early 1900s. But they definitely wanted people to have athletic outlets, and so they did. Well, the big boom happens right after World War I when they build this building. This was the gymnasium auditorium, as we have it right now, and on the north side and on the east and west sides they built classrooms. What you see as classrooms going off the south side didn't exist yet. It was just a door out, so to speak. And this was known as the recitation hall. They are sitting kind of where you are right now. 1928, they built this building because there were 260, almost 270 students on campus, and the only place to do education was Old Main. And the stories are that there are so many students on campus that some of the classes were in the hallway. They just took chairs in the hallway and they said, well, we're doing Latin today. And they just, arma, where rum quick. So they made the case, wait a second, we need classroom space. They have no idea what 1929 is going to bring. I have no idea. Incidentally, what else was being built at exactly the same time? The seminary in Mequon. Exact same time. The Synod is building this building and the seminary in Mequon, and this is dedication. That's what it looks like as it's finished. That's the north wall right over here. This is the 1932 faculty, and I'm not going to go through every single person except this guy right here. He's an extremely interesting person when it comes to the survey of the faculty, because that man is Godfrey Burke, B-U-R-K. Godfrey Burke was the first called professor in 1884. He had gone to Martin Luther College, Buffalo, New York, and then he went to Northwestern College, and he was at the seminary when he was called to be the first professor at this new college in New Ulm as a 23-year-old. He wasn't even, I don't think, done with the seminary, but they called Burke to be the first professor of preparatory education, even before they had a president. He served this campus for 59 years. His retirement year was in 1943. He saw everything from 1884 to 1943. Even beyond that, Art Schultz, who was somebody I knew, who served on this campus as the dean of education, so to speak, remembers that when he was a high schooler on campus, old Professor Burke still played organ for chapel. I think that's fascinating to me. From Burke to Art Schultz, to me, you span the whole entire campus, or the whole chronology, so to speak. But Professor Burke is interesting, so I don't know if some of the Burke relatives are here, Brad Price and well, oh, there we go. So he would have been your great-grandfather, right? And Brad's great-great-grandfather, right? He taught everything, by the way. Whatever he needed to teach, he taught. He was fluent in German, obviously fluent in English. He was a great musician. He could do it all, and he did it all, interestingly. You find enrollment fluctuations constantly on this campus. I'll go through it quickly. 1884 to 1900, about 50 to 100 students. 1900 to 1920, about 110 on average. There were times when it was lower. It was especially lower after Ackerman is removed forcibly, and everyone says, I don't know. Then the enrollment went down into the 70s. I had to build up trust again. By the mid-1920s, it's going great guns post-war, and they say, we need more space, let's build this building. So they do build the building. By the mid-1930s, it's down to 125. Fewer than half of the students in approximately 5 years. The enrollment declines to 125. Well, they build it back up slowly. By the mid-40s, it's about 300. 1955, first time we're over 500, but notice this. The college enrollment just slightly over 200. The high school enrollment almost 300. 1979 is the high water mark of teachers on this campus. The same year that Martin Luther Preparatory School opened. There are 850 college students on this campus. That's just teacher education only. When the amalgamation happens in 1995, in the early 2000s, for 4 straight years, there were over 1,000 students on this campus. For 4 straight years. I say that and I emphasize it because too often people will say, well, there was a year when it was over 1,000, almost 1,100. Yeah, no. 4 straight years our enrollment was over 1,000 on this campus. Pastor track and teacher track and staff ministry. 2025, last year, our final on-campus count was 589. Some of the factors, economic considerations I've talked about already. There is this principle called supply and demand. Well, we need more teachers. So very often that means it'll result in good recruitment because, well, you got a job waiting for you on the other end. But when the supply outstrips the demand, then all of a sudden the public relations goes the other direction. Well, they don't have calls for everybody. They don't have spaces for everybody. So this it's a reality that you're dealing with constantly in a church. This is, again, we're not an autonomous church-related school. We train at MLC pastors, teachers, and staff ministers. That's what we do. That's the only thing we do. Political situations are part of the mix. By that I mean that's kind of code for wars and so forth. Public relations, PR. What's the PR about a campus like this? What's the PR about the education you get? Anything like that. Adjustments in subsidy. How much are you subsidizing this campus or not? Any adjustment in subsidy is going to make a difference. Alternative paths to ministry. If we say, well, you can be a pastor or a teacher, but you can take a different path and you don't have to come to MLC. Or if you do, you just have to take a few online courses. Well, is that going to impact the way recruitment happens on this campus? And the honest answer is absolutely. And that side note, high school or preparatory enrollment always dominates until the 1960s. Here is the 1930 aerial photo. 1930 aerial photo, and this, whoops, I gotta get to my, where's my my thing? This right here is Burke's house. It still stands there. Burke's house is on the corner. This is Center Street, and this is Highland Avenue. So on the northwest corner, that box-like house is the Burke house. That's where he lived. This was the director's house. It was called Hillcrest Hall. This was the inspector's house, or the dean's house. Dean's house down here, 1930. This right here, 2 tennis courts. By the way, this right here, also a tennis court. I think they were really into tennis back then. Here's a standard line that the school has been co-educational since 1896. And guess what? Hillcrest Hall, director's house, becomes a women's dorm. There was a women's dorm below the hill. West Hall was added in 1945 as a temporary barracks. Centennial Hall was built in 1950. It's the centennial of Wisconsin Synod. Well, the Wisconsin Synod should do something. Okay, let's build a girls' dorm, so they did. So 1950 Centennial Hall. 62 Special Convention. Where should we locate teacher training? How can they improve or expand limited crowded facilities and so forth? Well, here's the building. Start at 1961 and go to 1971. In 10 years, the Music Center, Hillview Hall, 1964, now it's called Augustana. That's what it looked like inside. (1967-68), you build student union, gymnasium, cafeteria, all of that. 1967-68. Oh, by the way, these little tiered things you're doing right here, they just made the gymnasium into an auditorium. What else are they going to do? They're going to add a whole bunch of classes on the south side. Those were the MLA classrooms. That was MLA. Now you got a 1970, really, aerial photo. And what have you added? You've added 2 dorms here. You've added a significant gymnasium and student union cafeteria complex. You've added on these classrooms, and you made an auditorium in the middle of here. Yeah, and more tennis courts. Don't get me going on the tennis court, because you see this property right here? This is what the Synod bought, and they were going to move the academy out there. This is the academy property, which we still use today. The soccer fields are right in here. The tennis courts are behind them now. And the baseball diamond they moved to home plate to about right here. But they stuck the baseball diamond out in the middle of nowhere. And I mean, that is in the middle of nowhere. But that was the academy property. The library was 71. So 61 to 71, they built all those things. This was student life in the DMLC years. And you had everything from recording chapel to the new student union to the old library to, hey, they went on choir tour in the 1930s. And they did Music Man, and they had cheerleaders in the football bowl. That was built in 1974, first used in 74. Concerts and bands and graduations in front of Old Main, and the DMLC band of 1913 in the bottom corner, and they're marching over here past West Hall. And then this is the auditorium where I'm standing about right here. And the people are sitting level on the gym floor right here. And this was behind the screen. See the organ? That's this building. Now you got this one where you're having the convention. This is an interesting story. I said coeducational, they were always ahead of the game. I think in women's education, they were always ahead of the game. This is an interesting one. Title IX came in 1972. In 1974, this campus hosted the state of Minnesota college women's basketball tournament. Every single college and university had a women's basketball team came to this campus for a tournament, including the University of Minnesota. Guess who won? Dr. Martin Luther College won the tournament. They beat Winona State in the championship 41 to 39. You know who they played in the regional tournament, first round of the regional tournament? Kansas State. They played Kansas State in the first round, lost 62 to 41. But that's 1974. All right, DMLC presidents, the last ones, Lloyd Hebner and John Lorenz, before the amalgamation. Did they separate the academy? Yes, already in 1963 it had a separate teachers, separate administration. Some things that happened in that 80s, well, they put a front on the library so it didn't look so cement. 79 prep school, STEP, secondary teacher education, staff ministry, 1991. 1995, amalgamation, bringing everything to this campus. 2005, MLC has a master's degree program. In 2025, we were approved for alternate pathways to non-traditional licensure for teachers. This is the link on the north side, link on the south side, and this is the photo of the 1995 amalgamated faculty of Northwestern College and Dr. Martin Luther College. And there are many who are in that photo who are now in heaven. And as far as I know, there are only 6 people in this photo that are still teaching on this campus full time. And I won't go through there later. What do? The mission is to train public ministry needs of the WELS. These are MLC's presidents: Theodore Olson until 2007, Mark Zarling until 2020, and now Rich Gergel, present. Chapel of the Christ, 2009. I liked the pond, but the building didn't like the pond. So the pond was a negative asset to the actual chapel itself, and so now it's a dry gulch. If you ever have a chance to come to the homecoming worship service, it's phenomenal, because you got all the choirs, you have all the band and everything, and it's worth the price of admission. No, I mean, you were at a church service there last night. It's a great space for worship. We also have a new early childhood center, 2013, off campus, but it is responsive to the needs of the Synod for training early childhood people. That's our aerial photo 2010. I love the tennis courts right there. Now the tennis courts are right there behind the soccer field. This is the academy property. That's the academy property now. The monuments that tell us who we are, right? Fishers of men, I will make you fishers of men. A statue exactly like this is on the Northwestern campus, and we co-opted from the Northwestern campus the Sprinter, which I walk past every single day. I was on the campus of Northwestern, and it's a nice connection to the past and the heritage of the past. COVID did have realities. Can you imagine going to chapel like that? But that was COVID reality. We now have the Betty Cohn Fieldhouse. Looks like that inside. Athletics today looks color. I mean, they didn't have color back then. But they did have tennis, but there was black and white. And now we've got all kinds of fun places to play. Our track team was even the champions of the entire conference in outdoor track, first time ever last year. Campus activities. We have Evangelism Day and Spam Ball and Arbor Day and plays and Winter Carnival. And this just shows you some of our students, our present students, doing EFE and participating in music things and musicals and so forth on campus. We have a cultural engagement center, which is relatively new, a specific section of the student union. Master's degree program, online certification. Some of our teaching is actually done from a computer screen, where you sit in your office and do that. Well, we start with Old Main, we end with Old Main. By the way, it was built before Herman. Herman didn't get there till 1897. Old Main is older than the Statue of Liberty. So the first people in Old Main didn't even know there was a Statue of Liberty. You can't say like all your German immigrants, they saw the Statue of Liberty and then they came, no, well, what's that? Well, like Herman said, one of my favorite things to tell people is that above the altar in the chapel is the 12-year-old Jesus in the temple. And the other monument on the hill is Herman. Oops, I got to get to this thing. Whoops, there. I got to get to Herman. Herman defeated the troops of Caesar Augustus in the year 9. Well, the guy who created the BC AD time frame did get it right, and Jesus was born before he was supposed to be born. And he went from 1 BC to 1 AD, so there's no year 0. And if you work out all the math, the 12-year-old Jesus in the temple and Herman the German defeating the troops could roughly be the same year. Or within it. I just think that's cool. I mean, I think that's cool. This is what Old Main looks like now because it's in color. And we're hoping to put a new entrance on it. Oh, by the way, it is winter here once in a while. I didn't show you any winter pictures until the end. It is winter once in a while, but I don't know. There's something nice about that, just that walk through the campus. Where I'm standing is where the seal was initially located in 1995. They took it up, and now they put it right there. It's still the way, the truth, and the life. And that's what this campus is all about. Amen.
Thank you, Professor Koelpin. I learned a lot of stuff from that, so thank you. Again, on behalf of the WELS Historical Institute, we thank you for doing this. Our next Our Great Heritage Series presentation will be this October, and now I can't remember the exact date, but President Schrader will be our speaker. It will be on a Sunday afternoon at Luther Preparatory School, and he'll talk about the history of preparatory school education on the Watertown campus. And then the following year, sometime, I don't think we have a date yet, in 2026, I will do something on Northwestern College. So we'll continue this series. The nice thing is that in case you can't get to Watertown, those will be recorded and put up on the WELS Historical Institute website, so you can view those at your leisure. I'll make one last plug for people consider joining the WELS Historical Institute. If you go to the table, you can see how you might do that. It's a way to support and stay involved in the story of our synod's history. Again, thank you all for being here. It's just a fantastic crowd tonight.
Thank you very much. Honestly, wow. You sat through a lot this afternoon. Yeah. And you still sat through this. But I'm going to put in a shameless plug for the book. I mean, honestly, it is really well done. And it's even 20% off right now, isn't it? I'm looking at Jeremy. He's giving me the nod at 20%. I mean, it's a $30 book, 20% off. You can't not have it. Everyone should have it. If you're WELS, you should own it. That and the Augsburg Confession.
So you got your free copy. Now buy some for some friends.
Well, I'm just saying, I saw somebody, I said, honestly, it is that good. It really is. And he did a great job in writing it, and they did a great job in layout, and it's worth the price of admission. So.
Blessings on your evening, and go enjoy some fellowship.
Thank you.